Rafi was a tourist who loved discovering places that most people ignored. He preferred quiet streets, hidden paths, and places that were not on regular maps. His trips were always about exploring and learning, not just taking pictures. He traveled lightly, with only a small bag, a notebook, and his camera. Most people did not understand why he liked old ruins or narrow caves, but Rafi found a strange peace in places where few dared to go. One morning, Rafi arrived at a small coastal town surrounded by tall cliffs. The cliffs were steep and rocky, rising sharply from the sea. The town itself was quiet. Fishermen moved along the shore, and children played near small boats. Rafi had visited many towns, but this one had something that drew him immediately. The cliffs were full of narrow caves, carved over hundreds of years by the waves. He could see small openings in the rock walls, and a feeling of mystery pulled him closer. As he walked along the cliff edge, an old man came forward. The man had white hair and skin that showed years of sun and wind. His eyes were sharp, and he seemed to notice everything. He introduced himself as Aman, a local who had spent his whole life in the town. "You are not from here," Aman said, his voice low but firm. "Most tourists do not go to the caves. The path is narrow. Some caves close behind you. Some people never return." Rafi smiled politely. "I am careful," he replied. "I like to see what others cannot." Aman studied him for a long moment. He nodded slowly and pointed toward a small path between two cliffs. "That way leads to a cave that few enter. You must be quick and careful. The tide can rise without warning. Do not be foolish." Rafi thanked him and started walking. The narrow path was difficult. Stones and loose rocks made each step dangerous. The walls of the cliffs pressed close. The wind from the sea was strong, carrying the smell of salt and wet stone. Sunlight barely reached the path, and Rafi had to rely on his small flashlight. The cave's entrance became visible after some time. It was very narrow. Only one person could enter at a time. Rafi took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was cooler than outside, and a damp smell of the sea filled his nose. The walls were rough and sharp. His flashlight revealed small pools of water and twisted rock formations. Each step echoed in the long, narrow space. The sound of waves outside was distant but constant. After walking for several minutes, Rafi noticed something unusual on the cave floor. It was partly covered in sand and stones, as if it had been hidden for a long time. He bent down and saw a metal container. Its surface was rusty, and the edges were bent. The container was not very large, but it looked heavy. Rafi could not guess how long it had been there, or who had left it. He knelt down and brushed away the sand carefully. The container had no lock, only a stiff lid. On the top, a symbol was faintly carved, faded by time. Rafi did not recognize the symbol. Curiosity and caution filled his mind at the same time. Why would someone leave a container in such a narrow cave? Was it forgotten, or was it hidden on purpose? Rafi's heart beat faster. He looked around the cave once more. The narrow walls and the faint sound of the waves made the space feel smaller. The shadows from his flashlight danced on the rocks, and for a moment, he imagined the cave as a place that had waited for centuries for someone to find it. He gently touched the lid. The metal was cold and rough under his fingers. He thought of the possibilities. The container could be empty, or it could have something valuable. It could be something simple, like old tools, or something mysterious. He had read stories of treasures lost in caves, of messages hidden for decades, and he felt the thrill of discovering something unknown. Finally, Rafi made a decision. Slowly, he lifted the lid. At first, only darkness was visible inside. Then, his flashlight revealed the contents. His eyes widened, and a chill ran through his body. He did not expect what he saw. His hand shook slightly, and he could feel his pulse in his neck. Rafi's face turned pale. The container held something that clearly did not belong in a quiet, hidden cave. Whatever it was, it had a story, a history, and a mystery. It was not something that came from the sea or the rocks. It was human, but in a way that made Rafi step back. He closed the lid quickly and stood up. The cave seemed darker now. Shadows pressed closer to him, and the sound of the waves felt louder, echoing like a warning. Rafi realized why Aman had warned him. Some things were hidden for a reason, and some paths were not meant for casual visitors. Rafi took a few steps backward, his mind racing. Questions filled him. Who had left the container here? Why? And most importantly, what did it mean? He wanted to leave, but at the same time, he could not stop thinking about the discovery. Something about the container demanded attention. He took out his notebook and tried to write down his first impressions, but the words felt insufficient. This was not a simple find. It was something that carried weight, history, and perhaps danger. His curiosity pulled him back toward the container. He wanted to examine it further, but he also felt the need to be cautious. Rafi decided to rest for a moment. He leaned against the wall of the cave and listened. The distant sound of the waves, the cold air, and the faint smell of salt made him feel alive and alert. The container waited silently in the sand, almost as if it had been expecting him. Minutes passed slowly. Every small sound in the cave seemed louder now. The water dripping from the ceiling echoed like tiny bells. Rafi's mind imagined stories of the container's past. Perhaps it had belonged to travelers like him, or maybe to someone who had hidden it long ago. He did not know, but he could feel the importance of what he had discovered. Finally, Rafi stood up fully. He decided to take a careful step forward, to look at the container once more, and to understand what it was. His flashlight lit the symbol on top again. He wondered if the symbol had meaning, if it was a warning, or a message from the past. Rafi knew one thing clearly. This discovery was only the beginning. The narrow cave, the hidden container, and the mystery inside had changed his journey. What he saw made him pale, but it also made him determined. He had to know the story behind the container, even if it meant going further into the unknown. Rafi's adventure in the cave had only begun. Rafi could not stop thinking about the container. Its strange presence in the narrow cave haunted him. He tried to recall every detail, the rusty metal, the faded symbol, and the way the shadows had seemed deeper around it. He knew he could not leave the cave without learning more. Yet, he also remembered Aman's warning. The path was narrow, the tide could rise, and the caves were unpredictable. Rafi took a deep breath and decided to examine the area around the container first. He noticed small scratches on the floor, as if something heavy had been moved several times. Tiny stones were arranged strangely, almost like someone had stepped carefully to avoid making noise. It was clear that the container had not been forgotten by accident. Someone had placed it here intentionally, and for a reason. He bent down and ran his fingers over the carved symbol again. It was not a symbol from any country he knew, nor was it like the letters or numbers in his notebook. It looked ancient, almost like it belonged to a group of people who had lived near the sea a long time ago. Rafi wondered if it was a warning or a clue. He carefully made a drawing of the symbol in his notebook, knowing that later it might help him understand the container's purpose. Rafi's curiosity grew stronger. He wanted to look inside again, but something told him to prepare first. The container might hold fragile items, old documents, or something dangerous. He removed his camera from his bag and adjusted the lens. Taking pictures now would preserve the details without touching it too much. Then he opened his notebook to write everything he noticed, from the scratches on the floor to the faint smell of metal. Hours passed, but in a cave like this, time felt strange. The narrow walls reflected his flashlight in many directions, making shadows that moved like shapes. The sound of the waves outside grew louder. Occasionally, small rocks fell from the ceiling, hitting the floor with soft taps. Rafi felt a mixture of excitement and caution. Finally, he lifted the lid again. The container was heavier than he expected, but his hands were steady. The first thing he saw was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The cloth was old and dusty. Carefully, he lifted it out and placed it on a flat rock. Underneath the cloth was a small book, a stack of papers, and a wooden box, sealed with a simple lock. The smell of old wood and paper filled the cave. Rafi opened the book first. The pages were yellowed and brittle. Words were written in neat handwriting, though the letters were strange and unfamiliar. Some pages had small drawings of landscapes and cliffs. Others had symbols similar to the one on the container. Rafi realized this book might belong to someone who had explored the caves long ago. Or perhaps it was someone who had hidden something important. Next, he carefully examined the papers. They were folded and tied with a thin string. As he unfolded them, he saw maps and diagrams. Some maps showed the coastline near the town, while others depicted caves and paths that did not exist on modern maps. The diagrams showed small objects, maybe tools or containers, along with notes in the same strange handwriting. Rafi's excitement grew. He might have discovered something historians or archaeologists had never seen. The wooden box was the most mysterious. The lock was simple, but when Rafi tried to open it, he found it very stiff. He did not want to force it, fearing he could damage the contents. Instead, he looked closely for a way to slide or lift the lid. On the bottom of the box, he found another symbol, carved very small. It matched the one on the container lid. Rafi realized these items were connected, carefully placed together by someone who wanted them to be found only by the right person. Rafi decided to take a short break. He leaned against the wall of the cave and thought about the story behind this container. Someone must have hidden these things years ago. Perhaps they were protecting secrets, or perhaps they were leaving a message for the future. The thought sent a shiver through him, but it also gave him determination. He wanted to know the full story. While resting, Rafi heard something strange. A faint sound echoed in the cave, almost like a soft whisper. He turned his head and shone his flashlight toward the entrance, but there was nothing. The sound came again, softer this time. It was difficult to tell if it was the wind, the waves, or something else. Rafi's heart beat faster. He reminded himself to stay calm. In caves, even small noises could seem strange. Rafi decided to continue exploring the cave. He carefully placed the book, papers, and wooden box back into the container and closed the lid. He needed to see if the container was part of a larger pattern. Perhaps other items were hidden deeper in the cave or in nearby caves. The narrow path made it difficult, but his curiosity pushed him forward. As he moved deeper, the cave walls became more jagged. Water dripped from the ceiling in small streams. His flashlight revealed small cracks, hidden crevices, and areas where the rock had shifted over time. He noticed tiny markings on the walls, lines and symbols that seemed similar to the one on the container. Rafi carefully traced them in his notebook. It felt like he was following a trail left by someone who had walked this cave centuries ago. Hours passed, and Rafi discovered another small chamber. The walls were smoother, and the ground was dry. In the corner of the chamber was a small hole in the rock. It was barely large enough for a person to fit through. Rafi's heart raced. Could there be another container, or another secret hidden behind the rock? He paused, thinking of Amon's warning. The tide could rise at any moment, and the narrow paths could trap him. Yet, the possibility of discovery was too strong to ignore. He took a deep breath and crawled carefully through the hole. The space beyond was tight and dark. His flashlight revealed another small container, similar to the first one, but older and more weathered. Rafi's hands trembled as he approached. This second container confirmed his thoughts. Someone had created a network of hidden objects in these caves. Each container had something to teach, something to reveal. Rafi lifted the lid of the second container. Inside, he found smaller items, small tools, a folded cloth, and a tiny wooden figure carved with care. The figure's features were detailed, and it seemed to represent a person or an animal. Rafi realized that the objects might have symbolic meaning, maybe even a story of the people who had hidden them. The sense of mystery grew stronger. Rafi stepped back and looked at the first and second containers together. He understood that the caves were more than a natural formation. They were part of a secret world, a place where someone had left pieces of a story for the future. Whoever had done this had planned carefully. The containers, the symbols, the maps, and the wooden figure were all part of a plan that only a patient explorer could discover. As Rafi prepared to leave the second chamber, he promised himself to return with more preparation. He needed more tools, more light, and perhaps help from someone who could understand the symbols. But for now, he had already discovered something incredible. The narrow cave had led him to hidden treasures of knowledge, and he felt that his journey was just beginning. Rafi carefully crawled back to the main path, carrying the first container. His mind was full of questions, plans, and possibilities. The cave felt different now, more alive, more mysterious. The walls, shadows, and faint echoes reminded him that he had entered a place of secrets, and each secret had a story waiting to be told. As he finally stepped out of the narrow entrance, the sunlight hit him sharply. The air outside felt warmer and brighter, but Rafi's mind was still inside the caves. He looked back at the cliff, knowing that more secrets were hidden within. He would return. He had to return. The first part of his adventure was over, but the real story was just beginning. Rafi returned to his small guest house by the shore. The sun was beginning to set, casting orange and pink reflections across the calm water. He placed the container, notebook, and camera carefully on the table. His mind was racing with everything he had discovered. The narrow cave, the strange symbol, the maps, and the second container, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle. He knew that solving this puzzle could take days, even weeks. He sat down and opened his notebook. The sketches of the symbols, the maps of the coast, and the small drawings of the caves filled the pages. He compared the symbols in the notebook with those on the containers. They were identical, yet slightly different in some places. Rafi realized that whoever had hidden these items had been very careful. Each container had its own unique symbol, but all were connected to a larger story. Rafi wanted to understand the handwriting in the old book. He tried to study it carefully, tracing the lines and curves of each letter. The script was unlike any language he knew. He wondered if it was a code or a special script used by a small group of people long ago. The diagrams in the book showed caves, cliffs, and the coastline, along with notes about tides and hidden paths. It was clear that the person who wrote it knew the land very well. Rafi realized he could not solve this alone. He needed help from someone who understood ancient writing, maps, or history. He decided to visit the town's small library the next day. Perhaps he could find books about local legends or old explorers who had lived in this area. Rafi hoped that someone there could help him decode the symbols and understand the meaning of the containers. The night was quiet. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the stars reflected in the dark water. Rafi sat by the window, looking at the cliffs where he had found the containers. He felt a strange connection to the place. It was as if the cliffs themselves were guarding the secrets of the containers, waiting for the right person to uncover them. Rafi could not sleep. He thought about the second container and the small wooden figure inside it. It was simple, yet it seemed meaningful. The figure had the shape of a person with arms folded across the chest. Rafi wondered if it represented someone who had hidden the containers or someone who had discovered them long ago. The thought made his imagination run wild. In the morning, Rafi packed his bag carefully. He brought the containers, notebook, camera, flashlight, and some water. He also carried a small magnifying glass, thinking it might help him examine the symbols more closely. His plan was to visit the library, but he could not resist returning to the cliffs first. The caves had more secrets, and Rafi was eager to explore them further. As he walked along the path to the cliffs, he thought about Amon's warning. The tide could rise quickly, and the caves could be dangerous. But Rafi was determined. He felt that he had already begun a journey he could not stop. The cliffs and caves called to him, and the containers had opened a door to a hidden world he had never imagined. When Rafi reached the narrow cave again, he noticed something new. Small footprints were visible in the sand near the entrance. They were fresh, unlike the dust and sand from before. Rafi paused, shining his flashlight carefully around the cave entrance. No one was there. The footprints stopped at the edge of the path. Rafi felt a shiver of curiosity and caution. Could someone else know about the containers? Had someone followed him, or was it just an animal? He decided to proceed carefully, paying attention to every sound. He walked deeper into the cave, watching the walls and the floor for movement. The narrow space echoed his footsteps, making each step seem louder than it was. When Rafi reached the first container, he noticed that the sand around it had shifted. It looked as if someone had been there recently, touching the container or examining it. Rafi's heart raced. He did not know if this was dangerous, or if someone was simply curious like him. He decided not to open the container yet. Instead, he took pictures of it and noted the changes in his notebook. Rafi moved toward the second chamber, where the second container was hidden. The narrow passage was difficult, but he managed carefully. When he reached the second container, he noticed that the wooden figure had been moved slightly from its original position. It was still on the rock, but now it faced toward the entrance. Rafi wondered who had moved it, and why. He took a deep breath and studied the figure carefully. It was small, carved from dark wood, and surprisingly detailed. The person had a calm expression, almost as if it was observing the cave. Rafi felt a strange connection to it, as if the figure was part of the story he had uncovered. He decided to place it carefully back in the container and close the lid. Rafi left the cave and walked toward the town. The morning sun was warm, and the air smelled of salt and wet stone. He thought about the library and the possible help he could find there. If someone could read the script or understand the symbols, it might explain why the containers were hidden and what they meant. Rafi felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This mystery was becoming bigger than he had imagined. At the library, Rafi met a young librarian named Lena. She was friendly and curious. Rafi explained his discovery, showing her the notebook, the drawings, and the photographs of the containers and symbols. Lena listened carefully, her eyes wide with interest. "This is amazing," Lena said. "I have read about some old explorers and traders who traveled along this coast. Some of them used secret codes and symbols to mark their discoveries. Maybe this is connected." Rafi nodded. "I think so. The symbols are on the containers, in the book, and on the walls of the cave. I do not know what they mean. I need help to understand them." Lena studied the symbols closely. Some of these shapes look like old writing used by secret societies or explorers long ago. I cannot read all of it, but perhaps we can find old records in the town archives. They may have maps or journals that match what you found. Rafi felt hope. Finally, he might find someone who could help him uncover the full story. He and Lena agreed to search the archives together the next day. Rafi knew it would take time, patience, and careful study. The mystery of the containers was growing, but he felt more confident with Lena's help. That evening, Rafi returned to his guest house. He placed the containers safely on the table and reviewed the notebook again. Every symbol, drawing, and note became more important. He realized that the containers were more than simple hidden objects. They were part of a story that someone wanted to preserve. Rafi also thought about the footprints in the cave. Someone else might know about the containers, and the possibility of being watched added tension to his adventure. He had to be careful. The caves were beautiful, mysterious, and dangerous in their own way. But the thrill of discovery and the chance to uncover a hidden history made him determined to continue. Before sleep, Rafi planned his next steps. He would return to the cave with Lena, study the symbols, and perhaps find more hidden containers. He felt a growing excitement, mixed with a sense of responsibility. The containers were not just his discovery. They belonged to history, to the people who had hidden them, and perhaps to the future explorers who would follow. Rafi fell asleep with the sound of the waves outside. In his dreams, the cave stretched endlessly, filled with containers, symbols, and secret stories. The adventure was far from over, and he knew that tomorrow would bring new discoveries. The hidden world of the cliffs was opening for him, slowly revealing its secrets one piece at a time. The next morning, Rafi woke up early. The sunlight shone over the calm sea, and the birds sang quietly near the cliffs. Today, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had decided to return to the caves with Lena. She had promised to help him study the symbols, and together they might understand the mystery behind the containers. Rafi packed his bag carefully. He carried the containers, the notebook, camera, flashlight, and some food and water. Lena waited at the town square, holding a small backpack and a folder with papers she had collected from the library. "Are you ready?" Lena asked, smiling but with a serious look in her eyes. Rafi nodded. "I think so. Today we will learn more about the containers and the symbols." They walked toward the cliffs. The path was narrow and rocky. The wind blew gently, carrying the smell of salt and wet stone. Rafi noticed the sunlight reflected on the cliff walls, creating small sparkling patterns. The cave seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but Rafi remembered Amon's warning. Some caves were not safe, and the tide could rise quickly. When they reached the narrow cave, Rafi paused. The footprints from yesterday were still faintly visible, leading into the entrance. He shone his flashlight inside. The cave looked the same, but shadows moved differently under the morning light. Rafi and Lena stepped carefully, listening to the echo of their footsteps. The first container rested in the sand exactly as Rafi had left it. He placed it on a flat rock and opened it carefully. Inside were the old book, the papers, and the wooden box. Lena knelt beside him, studying the items with wide eyes. "This book is amazing," Lena said. "Look at these drawings. They show the caves and cliffs in great detail. And these symbols are repeated many times. Someone wanted to make sure the information lasted." Rafi nodded. "I think the person who hid these containers knew that someone like us would eventually find them. But why? And why hide so many things in narrow caves?" Lena opened the papers and began to compare the maps with the coastline. "Some paths here are not on any modern map," she said. "Look at this one. It leads to a small area that is not easily visible from the sea or the cliffs. Maybe the containers were hidden there too." Rafi felt a shiver of excitement. The mystery was growing. It was not just one container or one story. There was a pattern. Someone had hidden knowledge, messages, and items carefully, probably over many years. Each symbol and map was a piece of the puzzle. They studied the symbols more closely. Lena noticed that some of the lines looked like a type of code. "I think this is not just writing. It is a code," she said. "Someone wanted to make sure only the right person could understand it. We might need to decode the symbols to find out more." Rafi traced one of the symbols with his finger. Each container has a symbol, and these symbols match the ones in the book and on the walls of the cave. This must be a system. Maybe each symbol tells us what is inside the container, or where the next one is hidden. Lena nodded. "Yes. If we understand the code, we can follow the trail. It is like a secret story that was left for someone brave enough to discover it." After hours of careful study, they noticed a pattern in the maps. Small marks on the edges of the maps matched natural features in the cliffs and caves. One mark seemed to point toward a narrow path deeper inside the cliff. Rafi's heart raced. Could there be another container hidden there? They decided to follow the map. The path was tighter and darker than the first cave. They moved slowly, shining flashlights on every wall and crevice. The air smelled of damp stone and salt. Tiny streams of water dripped from the ceiling. Each step echoed, making the narrow cave feel alive. Finally, they reached a small chamber. The walls were smooth, and the ground was flat. In the corner, half hidden under stones, was another container. It was smaller than the first two, but clearly related. Rafi and Lena exchanged a look of excitement. They had found another piece of the puzzle. Rafi lifted the lid carefully. Inside were old tools, small carved figures, and folded papers with symbols and sketches. Lena examined the papers. "These sketches show the coastline again, and some caves that we have not visited," she said. "Each container is part of a larger network. Someone wanted to hide knowledge across multiple locations." Rafi picked up a small carved figure. It was different from the one in the second container. This figure looked like a tiny animal. Its eyes were carefully carved, and it seemed to be watching them. Rafi felt a strange sense of connection. The figures were not just objects. They were part of a story, maybe messages or symbols of guidance. As they studied the container, Rafi noticed something unusual on the wall. A symbol was scratched into the stone, faint but visible. It matched one of the symbols in the book. Rafi traced it with his finger. "This is a clue," he said. "Someone left this here to guide the finder to the next location." Lena smiled. "It is clever." The person who hid these containers wanted someone who could think, observe, and decode the messages. They wanted the story to be discovered step by step. Rafi felt a rush of excitement. The mystery was becoming clearer. The containers, symbols, maps, and figures were all connected. Each discovery led to the next. He realized that this was not just a treasure hunt. It was a carefully designed story, a hidden history preserved for the right person. After documenting everything, Rafi and Lena prepared to leave. They took pictures, made notes, and carefully replaced the stones to cover the container. It was important to preserve the cave as it had been. The containers were not just objects, they were part of a larger plan, and they had to be respected. As they returned to the entrance, Rafi felt a sense of awe. The narrow caves were more than natural formations. They were a secret world, full of messages, symbols, and stories. Someone had hidden knowledge here, carefully, patiently, and with purpose. And now, Rafi and Lena were part of that story. Outside, the sun was higher in the sky. The air was warm, and the sound of the waves was calm. Rafi looked at the cliffs and thought about the person who had hidden the containers. Who were they? Why did they choose this place? And what was the final message they wanted to leave? Rafi knew they had more work to do. There were more symbols to decode, more caves to explore, and more containers to find. The story was unfolding slowly, and each step brought new surprises. But he also felt a sense of responsibility. The hidden history belonged to the past, and he had to honor it while discovering it. Lena looked at Rafi. "We are only at the beginning," she said. "The clues, the containers, and the symbols, there is more waiting for us. We have to be patient and careful." Rafi nodded. "Yes. We will continue. We will follow the story wherever it leads. The caves, the containers, and the symbols, they are guiding us. And I feel that we are getting closer to understanding the mystery." As they walked back to the town, Rafi carried the first container carefully. His mind was full of questions, ideas, and plans. The mystery was bigger than he had imagined. The narrow caves had revealed part of the story, but the final secrets were still waiting. Rafi knew one thing for certain: he could not stop now. The hidden world of the cliffs and the containers had captured his imagination and his heart. The adventure was far from over, and the story of the containers was only beginning to unfold. Rafi and Lena spent the next morning preparing for their final journey into the caves. Their excitement was mixed with caution. They had already discovered several containers, symbols, and maps, but something inside Rafi told him that the greatest secret was still waiting. Today, they would follow the clues to the deepest part of the cliffs, the part few people had ever seen. They carried the containers, notebooks, maps, flashlights, and ropes for safety. The narrow path toward the cliffside caves was challenging. Loose rocks made their steps careful and deliberate. The wind blew strongly, carrying the scent of salt and wet stone. The waves crashed far below, reminding them of Amon's warning: the tide could rise quickly. When they reached the narrow cave, Rafi paused for a moment. The first container rested in the same spot. He felt a strange sense of familiarity and respect. The cave had become more than just a hidden place. It had become a guide, leading him step by step toward a hidden history. Lena helped him lift the first container. They carefully opened it and examined the contents again: the old book, the papers, and the wooden box. Today, their goal was clear. They would decode the remaining symbols and follow the maps to find the final container. As they studied the book, Lena noticed a pattern she had not seen before. "Look here," she said. Some of the symbols repeat in a sequence. I think this is like a key. If we follow the sequence, it will tell us the order in which the containers were hidden. Rafi nodded. He traced the symbols with his finger. Yes. The person who hid these containers wanted someone to understand the order. If we follow it carefully, we will reach the last container. With their plan ready, they moved deeper into the cave system. The passages became narrower, darker, and more mysterious. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the air smelled damp and earthy. Their flashlights revealed cracks, crevices, and faint marks on the walls. Each mark matched the symbols they had studied, guiding them forward like a trail of breadcrumbs. After hours of careful walking, they reached a small chamber. The walls were smooth and slightly curved. In the corner, hidden under stones and sand, was a container unlike the others. It was larger, with more intricate carvings on the lid. Rafi felt his heart race. This had to be the final container. He lifted the lid carefully. Inside were several objects wrapped in cloth, more detailed than the previous containers. Rafi unwrapped the first bundle. It revealed a small journal, its pages yellowed with age but carefully preserved. The handwriting was the same as in the old book. The journal told a story, one of explorers who had lived along this coast centuries ago. As Rafi read aloud, Lena listened closely. The journal explained that these explorers had hidden containers across the cliffs and caves to preserve knowledge, tools, and records. They wanted their discoveries to be protected from storms, thieves, and time itself. Each container was placed carefully, with symbols and maps designed to guide someone patient and clever to find them. Rafi unwrapped the second bundle. Inside was a wooden box, larger than the first. The lock was simple but stiff. He opened it gently, revealing a collection of small carved figures, each different from the others. Some looked like animals, others like people. Rafi realized that these figures were symbolic. They represented the explorers, the places they had visited, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Lena studied the figures. They are beautiful, she said. Each one tells part of the story. It is like the explorers wanted to leave a message in shapes and symbols instead of words. Rafi nodded. And the symbols on the containers, the walls, and the maps, they are all part of the same message. We have been following the story all along, without realizing it. Finally, they unwrapped the last bundle. It was a small wooden chest, sealed carefully. Rafi opened it with care, revealing the most valuable items: detailed maps, letters, and a small metal key. The letters were written by the explorers themselves, describing their adventures, their discoveries, and their hopes for the future. The key, Rafi realized, might unlock something even greater, perhaps a hidden compartment or a final treasure. Rafi and Lena sat quietly, taking in the significance of their discovery. The containers, symbols, figures, and maps were more than objects. They were a message across time, a story preserved carefully for anyone curious and brave enough to follow it. We have learned so much, Lena said softly. But this key, it must lead to something important. Perhaps one more secret is waiting for us. Rafi agreed. They examined the maps carefully, comparing each symbol and mark with the key. One symbol matched the shape of the key exactly. Following the directions on the map, they realized there was a hidden compartment in the largest cave they had explored, a place they had not noticed before. With ropes and careful steps, they returned to the final cave. Rafi found the small opening described in the maps. It was hidden in the wall, just above the floor, and shaped like a small door. Using the metal key, Rafi slowly unlocked it. The mechanism clicked, and the door opened slightly. Inside was a small chamber, illuminated by the shafts of sunlight coming from the cave entrance. The walls were covered with more carvings, telling the story of the explorers, their journeys, and the people they had met along the coast. In the center of the chamber was a chest. It was larger than any container they had seen before. Rafi opened the chest carefully. Inside were journals, letters, tools, and artifacts, all preserved with care. Each item represented a part of the explorers' lives, their discoveries, and their knowledge of the coast. Rafi and Lena realized that they had uncovered a complete record of history, preserved in secret by people who had wanted the knowledge to survive. "This is incredible," Lena whispered. "We have found everything. The explorers left their story for us to discover. Their work, their life, and their lessons are all here." Rafi nodded, feeling a sense of awe. "We have followed their trail, decoded their symbols, and discovered their secret. Now, their story is ours to preserve and share carefully." They spent hours documenting everything. Rafi photographed each item, drew maps, and recorded the symbols. Lena wrote notes about the figures, the journals, and the carvings. They understood that the discovery was not just about the objects. They were unlocking knowledge, history, and a story that had survived hundreds of years. By the time they left the caves, the sun was setting. The cliffs glowed orange, and the waves reflected the colors beautifully. Rafi and Lena walked slowly, carrying what they could safely manage. They knew that the containers, symbols, and the final chamber represented a journey of discovery, patience, and courage. As they reached the town, Rafi felt a sense of accomplishment and wonder. He had entered the narrow cave as a curious tourist, and he had emerged as a part of a story much larger than himself. The explorers had left their legacy in a hidden place, and he had uncovered it carefully, step by step. Rafi looked at Lena. "We have done something important. We have preserved a story that might have been lost forever." Lena smiled. "Yes. And we have also learned that the world is full of secrets, waiting for people brave enough to discover them. This adventure has only begun for us. There are more stories out there." Rafi nodded, thinking of the cliffs, the narrow caves, and the containers. The hidden world had shared its secrets with him, teaching him patience, courage, and respect for history. He knew that he would return to these cliffs again, not to take anything more, but to remember the explorers, their story, and the adventure that had changed his life. The cliffs were quiet now. The caves were still. But Rafi knew that their hidden secrets had been revealed, one by one, to the right person at the right time. He had discovered history, mystery, and a story that would live on. And for the first time, he felt the full meaning of adventure, not just the thrill of discovery, but the responsibility to honor the past. Rafi smiled, knowing that the cliffs and caves had trusted him to uncover their secrets, and he had done so with care. The containers, the symbols, and the hidden chambers were no longer mysteries. They were treasures of knowledge, preserved across time, and now they would be remembered forever.